again. "Wrong side," I told him, feeling silly. Of course he knew that a plumeria over the left ear meant I was taken, and one on the right meant I was looking. Mari had been the one to teach me, years ago. "I don't think so." I felt my heart turn over in my chest with a fearful kind of hope. "Oh?" I asked in a weak voice. "Why don't you think so?" He sent me a suspiciously innocent look. "Well, you're not looking for a man, are you? A flower on the right side means you want every interested guy to hit on you." I supposed he had a point, since that was the last thing I wanted. I fingered the flower as we made our way from the small patch of lush forest that led to the ocean. "It's as beautiful as I remember," I told him, taking in the enchanted green serenity around me. "Yes," he said simply. The black sand beach was just as I'd remembered it, too, and the ocean. Oh, the ocean. I'd always had such a fascination with that endless expanse of blue, and I always found it to be the most beautiful sight at sunset, which was fast approaching. Akira sat in the sand, pulling me between his spread legs without a word. I leaned back against his chest, thinking that this was my own perfect little slice of paradise. "I think I could stay like this forever with you," I told him quietly. He pressed a cheek against my hair, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "Why don't you, then? Give me one good reason why you can't stay on this rock." My breath grew ragged, and I couldn't seem to find the breath to speak. I'd been so brave when I was younger, declaring my feelings with no hesitation or reservation whatsoever. It seemed as though I'd just used it all up back then, with none of it left for the grown-up me. It made me sad, but I still couldn't seem to ask him the questions I wanted to. Could I just stay here? Was it a terrible idea or a brilliant one? I couldn't live my life based on whether or not Akira could love me like I did him. I knew that was not the way to live. But could I live here, and see him every day, and be able to endure the longing if we weren't together? "I'll have to think about it," I told him quietly, watching the sky turn brilliant with the sunset. He nuzzled his face into my neck, placing a soft kiss there. "You do that." "You want me to stay?" I asked him, holding my breath to hear his answer. "Yes," he said thickly. "I want that." He cleared his throat. We were both silent for a long time, watching the sky turn colors in a glorious display that had never failed to move me. "This place is the most beautiful sunset in the world," I murmured. "Yes, the beach for sunset, and Haleakala for sunrise. Guess where we're going in the morning?" I turned my head to give him an amused smile. "You really want to wake up at 4 a.m. to catch the sunrise?" "More like 3. And yes, we're going. It's been years since either of us has seen a Haleakala sunrise, and I think it's fitting that we go together." I snuggled my way into his chest, feeling a wave of contentment wash over me. Even if the world ended tomorrow, I thought I could be okay with it, after having watched this perfect sunset, and after a perfect sunrise with the love of my life. It only took one small stroke of his thumb against my collarbone to change the mood, from sweet to hot, in an instant. He kissed just the perfect spot on my neck, his hands finding and kneading at my breasts with just the right pressure. I moaned. "You're going to ride me reverse, cowgirl," he murmured into my ear, "so you can watch the sunset while I make you come. You will never forget this ride." "Sex on the beach? Isn't that messy?" I asked ruefully, but I was so game. "We'll get sand in our unmentionables." "Maybe. It won't be so bad if you're on top, but it will probably be messy, and God only knows where we'll be finding sand later. Do you mind?" As he spoke, he was shifting me against him, lifting me higher so that he could slide his hips under me, parting my legs to straddle him. I was already untying my bikini bottoms as he opened his slacks, freeing himself. "I do not. I can't believe you wore a dress shirt and slacks to the beach, Akira." He didn't respond, but I heard a harsh gasp behind me as I lined myself up over his stiff length. I was already wet, desire only taking the briefest thought for me when it came to Akira. I circled my hips, wetting his tip. He groaned loudly. I worked him into me slowly. I had no choice with his size and the angle. He was so thick that I held my breath as I worked the last few inches inside of me. I sucked in a rough breath when I was finally seated to the hilt, stuffed full of him. I just stayed like that for a while, adjusting to the size and the angle, which felt even more wonderful with every breath I took, and watched the sunset. "You're missing the sunset in this position," I gasped at him. His hand stroked my hips, kneading at my flesh. "I'm not missing anything, baby," he rasped. "Most beautiful view I've ever had in my life." I shuddered at his words, and began to move, pushing on my knees to lift up and forward, then down and back to reseat myself. We both cried out loudly. "You feel so good, Akira. You're so big, but it feels so good. You're so fucking tight, baby. I don't know how long I'll last, but I want to stay inside of you for days." I whimpered, lifting up again, the delicious slide of him dragging along every sensitive nerve inside of me. "I won't last days, Akira. I don't even think I'll last minutes like this." He grunted. "Good. Me too. I intend to spend as much time inside of you as possible, and I have no problem trying until we get it right." I ground back down onto him, then dragged up again, my movements getting faster. He gripped my hips tighter, moving his hips to take over the movements. I was fine with that, since he built us into just the right rhythm, pounding into me. My head fell back, but I kept my eyes open on the brilliant sky as I came, shivers of ecstasy rocking my body as the sky continued to give me the show of a lifetime. I cried out his name hoarsely, unable to even try to keep it in. He shouted my name, bottoming out inside of me with one last hard slam, his hard hands on my hips all that kept me upright. It took long minutes for us both to recover. We covered the essentials and settled back into watching the sky and the ocean again. I sighed contentedly as the last brilliant streaks of gold faded from the sky. It was a perfect night, very little of it spent sleeping. I thought that Akira had elicited every last orgasm inside of me by the time I drifted into a deep but short sleep. He was waking me again way too soon. "No, humans need to rest, Akira." "I know, Lana. You just need to bundle up and get into the car. I'll do all the driving, and you can sleep until we reach the top of Haleakala." "Fine," I said grumpily, sitting up. We'd ended up sleeping in my old bedroom, and I raided the closet for jeans and a sweatshirt. We were in the car and driving within 15 minutes, and I leaned my chair back, promptly falling back to sleep. I grumbled when he woke me again, calling him a few nasty names as I woke up what seemed like an instant later. Of course, I had to take it all back as I watched the sun rising in what I was convinced was the most beautiful sunrise in the world. Streaks of gold painted the clouds that hovered just below us. Cradled in Akira's arms, I knew that this was the closest to paradise I'd ever been. Chapter 8. "Let's go hang out at the bar," he murmured into my ear later that afternoon. We'd spent the morning surfing. The salt water had stung the crap out of my feet at first, but I hadn't made a peep. I wouldn't miss out on a day of surfing with Akira for any amount of discomfort. I stiffened, because Lana worked there. He seemed to read my thoughts. "Lana is taking some time off. She's been too unstable lately to even work." I agreed easily enough. I'd never pass up on a chance to see Tutu and Mari. We reached the stretch of Kahlua shops quickly, sharing a companionable silence in the car. Akira opened the door for me before I'd even unbuckled my seatbelt. He had always been like that, always the gentleman for me, even when I was 10, when he'd called me a little lady, as he opened it with a flourish. I had secretly loved the title. The bar was already crowded, even though it was early afternoon. I realized that it was Friday. This place had always been hopping on Friday night. 2 spaces at the full bar magically opened up when a few locals saw that Akira wanted us to sit there. He nodded at them respectfully. They nodded back, not having to explain. It was a fact that Akira Kalua got and gave respect in these parts. No words needed to be exchanged. He ordered a beer, looking at me when the bartender asked what for the lady. I smiled at the friendly man, not recognizing him at all. It didn't mean that he was new, I supposed. It just meant that he wasn't more than 8 years into the job. There was a time when I would have known everyone here. Even as an underage teenager, I'd practically lived here. He was a local. He had a slight build and friendly brown eyes. He was the opposite of Akira looks-wise, looking harmless with his nice smile. "Just water, thank you." Akira gave me a disgusted look, his mean upper lip curling at me. "That's boring." I laughed. "What? Are you disappointed that I won't be getting drunk and letting you take advantage of me?" It was a score. He almost blushed at the comment. I leaned forward to whisper in his ear, "You know, I don't have to be drunk for that. You can search me on the internet any time you like, and have your way with your filthy palm." He grabbed me, tickling me unmercifully for the taunt. There were tears running down my face before he let me loose, a grin on his face. I knew without having to look around that we had the attention of the bar crowd. I didn't care. I smiled back at him, a happy twinkle in my eye that had been absent for at least 8 years. "I know when you torture me that much that I hit a nerve." He was smiling at me unreservedly, a smile that was rare and that I treasured. His eyes were soft, and he just looked happy. "Come here," he said, pulling me against him and kissing the top of my head. We separated quickly from the embrace, both suddenly self-conscious. I resumed my own seat, taking a drink of my water. He clucked his tongue at me. "At least get a soda or something. That is just a sad thing to drink at a bar." I just shrugged. "I don't like soda. I guess I wouldn't mind tea." He rose, kissing the top of my head again, as though we couldn't help it. "I'll be right back. Tutu has the best tea next door. You still take it plain?" I nodded, my eyes following his every move as he strode across the room. A few familiar locals stopped to greet me, as though they'd been intimidated to approach when Akira was there. I smiled and chatted with them, catching up a bit. When Akira returned, he brought my tea, and Tutu. They were a sight, mother and son, one so massive, the other the definition of petite. It always made me smile, because the tiny one called the shots. Akira was a respectful, dutiful son. She was all smiles, in a doozy of a mood, at her most benevolent. It made all of us a little wary. You had to worry a bit when Tutu was that happy. She hugged me, a seat magically vacating itself so she could sit beside me. She gave Akira a pointed look. "Well, what are you waiting for? Go work the cafe. I need to talk to my granddaughter." He gave her a borderline unfriendly look, but sure enough, he obeyed. Tutu turned her regard to me, and I was almost scared at her intense expression. Tutu hadn't liked me at first, when I began to dog Akira's heels as a child. She'd called me a haole and ignored me. I hadn't gone away, so eventually she had started to talk to me. At first I'd just gotten lectures about how Maui should belong to the locals again, and how men like my father were the problem. She had scared me as a child, so I hadn't argued with her, not even to defend my dad. I had just nodded solemnly, as though I understood what she was saying well enough to agree. I hadn't, but she had taken my agreement as respect. And so our special bond began. I grew on her over the years with my earnest perseverance. She respected my persistence and my audacity, and I respected her. I had desperately wanted her approval. I was around 10 when I began to tell anyone who would listen that I was going to marry Akira when I grew up. Tutu hadn't liked that. She had been mad at me whenever I worked up the nerve to repeat it to her. But I'd respected her, so I had wanted her to know my intent. She had finally berated me so soundly for it that I had run to Akira crying. I had explained it to him, and he had been sympathetic, taking me back to the formidable woman so that we could make up. Tutu had patted my head affectionately then. "It's not your fault, Lana. You're not a local. You can't help that. Akira needs to marry a local girl. It's our way." I had been crying, but I had stood my ground anyway. "But I want to be in your family," I had told her in an angry little voice. She had studied me with a little smile. She was a diabolical woman, so even that smile had been a little scary to a 10-year-old. "I'll tell you what. I don't have any grandkids because of my worthless children." She had paused there to send Akira a long, malevolent glare. He'd smirked, unaffected. "But you are a lovely child. I've never seen a little girl more beautiful than you. Your purple eyes make me think you might have magic, which is very good. And you're smart. And you're a stubborn little thing. And I like your backbone. And I think you're just ornery enough to be a Kalua. So you may have the distinct honor of calling me Tutu. It means grandma." I'd looked at Akira, wanting him to approve. He'd smiled warmly at me, and I was ecstatic. I knew it was the biggest accomplishment of my young life, being the first to call her Tutu. "So you're family now. Perhaps Akira will be less worthless and stupid when you're finally a grown-up." I looked at Akira as she spoke. His nose had just wrinkled at her, his only answer. The look said, "Not happening." Tutu had continued, thankfully ignoring the look. "And since you're family now, and therefore a local, I will approve of the marriage." I had been on cloud 9 for ages after being added to my favorite family. Akira and Mari had turned it into a bit of a joke, and took to calling her Tutu as well. They said that since she wanted grandkids so badly, that everyone should just call her Tutu, since neither of them planned to ever get married. Soon all of the locals took up the habit of calling her Tutu, and she had taken to the title, as though that was what she had wanted all along. Chapter 9. Tutu brought me back to the present by leaning forward to press her nose and forehead against mine. It was an affectionate gesture, one you would give a granddaughter. I smiled at her fondly as she pulled back to study me. "You know I'm old and stubborn, and I decided a long time ago that I'm too old to have to change my mind about anything. I get to be set in my ways now. It's the law. But I have decided to change my mind about one thing. I wasn't wrong about it. I've just changed my mind. Your howly dad is not the problem with Maui." I raised my brows at her, wondering where this was going. I had always suspected that she was secretly grateful to my dad for being a mentor to Akira, but she would never admit it, or so I had thought. "He isn't the problem, because he had you. And if you have Akira's babies, lots of them preferably, then they will inherit back some of our land for us. So you see, your dad is only some of the problem with Maui." I smiled at her weakly, uncomfortable talking with her about anything to do with Akira, now that I was grown. It was obvious that my promise to marry him would not be kept, at this point. She just patted me on the shoulder and stood. "I just needed to get that off my chest. I might die tomorrow, so you should listen to me. I might haunt you forever if you don't." That one made me laugh, my discomfort passing. I had heard that famous Tutu quote many a time. It was one of my favorites. Even as a child, when the thought of being haunted had been kind of scary, I had still felt a little comforted by the notion of Tutu staying near me forever. Akira was grimacing as he rejoined me. He studied me. "Tutu was giving me the most evil cackle when she sent me back in. You okay? What crazy thing did she say to you?" I just shook my head, smiling. "Just some Tutu wisdom. She's in rare form today. She even threw her 'I might die tomorrow, I'll haunt you forever' line at me. Cantankerous as ever." That made him laugh. I touched the dimple in his cheek as he did so. I couldn't seem to help it. My hand had a mind of its own, and his eyes got so soft when I did that. He shocked me by pulling me snugly into his arms, placing a sweet kiss on top of my head. When he didn't immediately release me, I just went with his affectionate mood, throwing both of my arms around his neck, and burrowing my face into my favorite spot on his chest. I knew the bar crowd was staring at us. Akira was not exactly known for being a demonstrative, affectionate man. Just the opposite, in fact. But he had always been different for me. Everyone had probably just forgotten that. I had been gone a long time. He was in a kind mood, and so let me stay like that for a long time, my cheek on his chest, his hand stroking over my hair. I felt him playing with the streaky waves. He even brought a lock to his lips at one point. I wanted to stay like that forever, crowded bar or not. I felt cherished like that. We didn't speak for a long time. I didn't even consider it. I didn't want to risk breaking the spell. He took long drinks of his beer, but never relinquished his hold on me, and didn't push me away. I wasn't planning to move an inch if he didn't make me. "Do you want me to get you more tea?" Akira murmured, his mouth close to my ear as he spoke. I made a non-committal noise into his shirt. "Maybe later." His hand stroked my back. "I need to go tell Mari that you're here anyway. She'll never forgive me if you come here to hang out, and she doesn't even know about it. I'll be right back, 'kay?" He set me away from him as he spoke, and I sat back down in my chair, already missing that warm embrace. He kissed my head before he left. Milena must have had someone on the watch out for him to leave, because just seconds after he'd left the bar, she was taking his seat beside me. She glared at me malevolently. I recognized that she was beautiful, but I had never understood why Akira was with her, other than that. He could have had anyone, and she was rude and mean, and overly aggressive. I had never understood their relationship, but I'd always hated it. "You think you're special to him, but you're not. You're nothing but his little puppy," she said in a vicious voice. I just sighed at her weak attack. Really, she could have done better. It wasn't hard to hurt my feelings where Akira was concerned, but she had somehow managed to miss a very large target. "Did you have a point? He says you're not his girlfriend anymore," I said, wanting to hear her take on that. She flushed. "Not now I'm not. But he was mine for years, Howley. How long did you get him for? A night or two? Just think of how good those nights were, and then think of 1,000 nights like that. That's what I got from him. You got nothing. You are nothing, and yet you have the nerve to disrespect me?" I raised my brows at her. "How so? I think I do a pretty good job of staying out of your way, which is what you clearly prefer." I saw her getting visibly more agitated at my words. That hadn't been my intention. I wasn't trying to make her mad. I just wanted her to go away. She pointed a red-tipped finger at me. "You fucked him when he was my man, back when you were 18. I heard you talking about it, so you can't even deny it." I froze at that accusation, because it actually hurt. "You were broken up at the time," I told her, lifting my chin. That sharp nail poked me in the chest hard. It stung. Her voice was a near shout when she responded. "That breakup was his idea, and I didn't agree to it. And since we got back together a few months later, that breakup didn't even count. So you fucked my man." As she spoke, her nail jabbed hard into my chest, several times to emphasize her point. My eyes widened. So they had been broken up when he'd made love to me the first time. I hadn't been sure of that, after overhearing a conversation they'd had the day after he'd been with me. The idea that he'd lied to me about something like that had haunted me for years. I was so relieved to find that he really hadn't lied. I just looked at her steadily, determined to pretend her sharp pokes didn't sting like a bitch. "Do you have any idea how crazy you sound right now? If someone breaks up with you, that is called being broken up. You don't have to agree to it for it to count." Her eyes widened, and I saw the moment her crazy switch snapped on. Her eyes going wild, her fingernails flying at my face. I'd never been in a fight before, but I'd seen quite a few of them, and I'd always looked down on the girls that used their nails or went for the hair. I had always told myself that if I ever had to fight somebody, I'd use my fists, goddammit. It was pure instinct that had me slapping my hand to her forehead before those mean nails could reach my face. I was taller, so my reach was better. It was that simple. But it hurt like crazy when she started scratching at my arm like a wild animal. I fisted my free hand, almost excited to try my first real punch on somebody, especially since that someone was Milena. I swung at her face, since her cheek was practically asking me to. It was pointing right at me. It didn't knock her out cold, unfortunately, as I'd been sort of fantasizing it would. It didn't really even slow her down. I made solid enough contact that it hurt my hand, but it only seemed to piss her off more, if that was possible. She finally got a hold of my hair, in spite of my better reach. She yanked a hunk out, hard, calling me every nasty name in the book. I had a few choice words for her as well, the most prevalent ones starting with a C. I punched her again, in the head that time. Ow. That one definitely hurt my hand more than it hurt her head. I quickly resorted to hair-pulling, my punching skills sorely lacking. I gripped the top of her hair, trying to ignore what she was doing to my arm, even though it hurt like hell. I had a sudden spark of inspiration. My fists were a no-go, but my knee might be hard enough to do some damage. I bent my injured elbow, pulling her a little closer, and raising my knee up into her stomach with the same motion. Score, I thought. It knocked the breath out of her, and I did it again, just because my arm was wet with blood from her evil claws, and it still hurt like a motherfucker. I was getting ready to knee her again when she was torn away from me. I met Akira's frantic eyes as he grasped her around the middle, pulling her away from me. His eyes ran over me, widening when he saw the bloody scratches that covered my arm. He cursed as he pulled her farther from me. Big arms wrapped around me from behind. I realized that it was some man who thought I was going to try to attack Lana, even after she'd been pulled off me. I hadn't even considered the idea. I saw Akira's eyes as the man put hands on me. It was a scary sight. They went from frantic straight to batshit crazy, his own crazy switch snapping on. Akira was about to blow. He spared one of the arms holding a furiously struggling Lana to point it at the man directly behind me. "Get your fucking hands off her," he barked at him. The man released me instantly. Akira eyed the crowded bar, his look a warning. "If anyone else lays so much as a fucking finger on her, I'm going to jail tonight," Akira shouted to the room at large, before pulling his Psycho X out the door. Akira came back inside less than 5 minutes later, looking positively volatile. His eyes were still wide as he approached me. I was sitting in my same chair by the bar, Mari and Tutu hovering over me, carefully rolling up the sleeve of my scratched-up arm to see how bad it was. Other than a missing hunk of hair, it was the only part of my body she had managed to reach. I was kind of proud of the fact. So were Mari and Tutu, going by their excited chatter. "Lana's been in lots of fights, but I'd say you won, pretty girl," Mari was saying, more concerned with establishing my victory than with the actual fight. I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. Tutu nodded sagely. "I always knew it," she said, as though she had predicted the whole thing and knew exactly how it would turn out. It was typical Tutu. Mari and I shared an amused look. Akira's first good look at the deep gouges in my arm had him turning away. He strode to the nearest wall, pulled back his arm, and punched a hole in it. It was a very impressive display of both his rage and his strength. I wanted to tease him about it, but knew that it was too soon to try joking with him like that. His eyes were less wild, but just as agonized when he approached me again. "I'm so sorry, baby." He squeezed in to embrace me, completely ignoring his mother and sister, who were both cursing him for taking their spots. He kissed the top of my head. "Come on, Lana, you need to have those cleaned up at the hospital." I let him pull me gently to my feet by my good hand. Mari and Tutu shouted advice at him as he pulled me to the door. "Get back to work," he shouted back, ushering me outside. He was very quiet in the car, using one hand to drive, the other one warmly gripping my knee. The touch was meant to be comforting, but it was still an instant turn-on for me. I used the hand of my uninjured arm to inch the loose skirt of my sundress up my legs, parting them as I did so. Akira shot me a stern look, but didn't fight me when I slid his hand higher, onto my inner thigh. I worked the material of my dress high, until I was exposed enough to shove his hand just where I wanted it. He stroked me with a soft touch, though his eyes were still hard as he gave me a censorious look. "You are incorrigible," he told me, plunging a thick finger inside of me. He stopped the divine motion almost immediately, since we were already pulling into the hospital parking lot. "I won the fight," I told him proudly as he pulled me out of the car by my good hand. I wanted him to know that, in case he hadn't noticed when he was breaking it up. He glared at me. "You shouldn't have been fighting in the first place," he told me with his best lecturing tone. I glared back. "You think I started that? I was just defending myself. Your ex is a psycho, but I still won." His face tightened harshly enough that I felt it pull at the strings on my heart. I could see, just from his face, that he was blaming himself for the whole sordid fiasco. "It's my fault. I shouldn't have left your side. I was so sure she wouldn't show. I warned her that if she came to the bar while you were in town, or laid so much as a finger on you, that she'd lose her job. I thought surely that would be enough to keep her from trying to harm you. But she either didn't believe me or just didn't care." I was shocked. "So you fired her?" He nodded, his face hard. "And you need to press charges. She needs to know that she can't touch you." I mulled it over. Our fight had been unwelcome, and my arm hurt like hell, but Malena losing her job over it seemed like enough of a punishment to me. "I'm not going to. If you fired her, I think that's enough of a punishment." He looked like he wanted to argue with me, but he stayed silent, pulling me to the hospital entrance. "I still hate her guts, though," I continued. "I'm so jealous of her that I can barely stand it." He looked genuinely surprised by my confession. I couldn't imagine why he'd be surprised by it. "Why on earth would you be jealous of her?" he asked. "She told me she'd had 1,000 nights with you, and I only got 2. 1.5, rather. I hate her guts for that. And knowing you two, you'll probably reconcile again in a week." He gave me a very annoyed look as he opened the door for me. "That's ridiculous, Lana. We've been broken up for years, though I guess you wouldn't know it by how she still acts. I can't understand why she can't get over it. We were never good for each other, and over the years we only got worse. She resented me for what I couldn't feel for her, and if I'm brutally honest, I only stayed with her for so long because I thought that I didn't deserve better. I ended it years ago, though, when I realized that I'd much rather be alone than with someone who brought out the worst in me. Malena is a bitter woman who can't grow up enough to let go of the past, the very distant past at that. You have nothing to be jealous of." I mulled that one over. She wasn't the only woman who couldn't let go of the very distant past. His assessment wounded me, because even though he'd been referring to Malena, I knew that I was no different. I wanted to let go, but I didn't seem to have that ability. I wished to God that I did. Unwillingly, my mind wandered back to the past. Chapter 10. 8 years ago. When Akira had asked me what I wanted him to get me for my 18th birthday, I hadn't even had to think about it. I wanted him, though I was smarter than to tell him that. Instead, I had asked him to spend the day with me. He agreed without hesitation, though he stubbornly insisted that I couldn't call it a date. He hadn't had to ask me how I wanted to spend the morning. That one was a no-brainer. We spent it in the ocean, catching waves for endless hours. I had straddled my board a lot, practicing provocative poses, trying to tempt him, as I had taken to doing a lot recently. But today it was different. I was a grown-up today, and there was no reason for Akira not to touch me now. I arched my back when he looked at me, thrusting my full breasts forward in my tiny lavender bikini. It was literally the tiniest one I could find, barely covering the essentials. He gave me his stern, knock-it-off look, and went back to studying the waves. When he'd seen me walk out wearing the minuscule suit, he just raised his brows and said, "I guess you want to watch me get into some fights on your birthday." His tone had been dark, his face forbidding, but I had beamed at him, taking it as a good sign. He watched the waves for a good 10 minutes after he'd given me the look. Then finally, I'd resorted to drastic measures. I'd gone to great lengths to assure that I didn't have a tan line for tonight, wanting my body to look perfect for him. I'd been tanning naked in my backyard, so the feeling of the soft breeze on my bare chest was not at all that foreign to me as I untied the top of my suit, letting it fall down to my waist. I studied the waves as Akira did, pretending not to notice the slip. I felt my breasts tighten the second that he saw what had happened. He started cursing. "Lana, your top!" He snapped at me. I looked down at my chest, acting baffled, as though I couldn't imagine what could have happened to it. He was still cursing as he straddled his own board, paddling over to me to fix it himself, since I was being too slow about it. I glanced around as he covered my breasts with the tiny triangles of material. I tried to look worried. "Do you think anyone saw?" He glanced around, his face thunderous, ready to stare down, or possibly pound, any poor fool he caught looking. But there was no one. We were virtually alone. All of the other surfers far enough away that they couldn't have gotten a good look. "Will you tie it for me, Akira? I guess I didn't tie it tightly enough." He tied it at my neck without a word. The triangles didn't fall into place on their own, though, so I was still exposed. I made no move to cover up, so he did that too, moving the thin material over my hard nipples, cursing all the while. I didn't bother with the trick again. It obviously hadn't worked, so the rest of the morning was spent surfing and basking. I spent most of it watching Akira. He was so magnificent that I could have watched him forever. We didn't get back to his house until mid-afternoon. I used his tiny downstairs shower to wash off all of the sand and salt and sea, and Akira used his master bath upstairs to do the same. I had toyed with the idea of slipping into his shower with him and seducing him there, but decided against it. It didn't seem fair to sneak in on him like that. He was lounging on his back on his lived-in sofa when I re-emerged from the bathroom. He was wearing some soft athletic shorts, black with a white stripe down the side, and nothing else, his glorious chest bare. He didn't glance up at me as I came to see what he was watching on TV. That was fortunate, since I might have lost my nerve if he had looked at what I was wearing right at first. I was wearing a micro-mini pleated red plaid skirt, and a small, short-sleeved, white button-down shirt with it. It was a naughty schoolgirl look that I had seen Lana wear a few times, and so figured Akira must like the look. Mine had a few extra naughty modifications, like no panties or bra, and all of the buttons undone on my top. It gaped open, exposing my full tan breasts with their tiny coral-colored nipples. "What do you want to do now, birthday girl?" Akira asked without looking up. I bit my lip, deciding to go for it with gusto. I was straddling his prone figure before he could blink, lining my pantyless sex along his soft shorts. His eyes flew open wide in shock, staring at my exposed breasts as though he didn't have a clue what they were. I was unbelievably gratified when I felt him growing hard against me. Instinctively, I started to rub myself against him, finding the material of his shorts to be soft against my bare skin. I was a virgin. In fact, I'd never even kissed a guy, since Akira wouldn't kiss me. But I had a filthy mind and a filthy mouth, and I'd learned all I'd thought there was to know on the internet. It was one of my favorite pastimes lately, finding some new and shocking thing on the internet, then using it to shock Akira. His face turned purple sometimes, when I disturbed him enough with my latest findings. I would get a 30-minute lecture after that, but it was always worth it. I'd always liked even his sternest lectures. I moaned as he just kept growing against me. I could tell he was big, even without looking. He felt massive and hard as a rock as I moved my sex against him, arching my back to rub him on a spot that felt particularly divine. He just watched me, looking like a deer in headlights. I reached into the elastic waistband of his shorts, gripping him with my hand, and he gasped. I made a little sound of pleasure in my throat. I loved the feel of him so much. He was so hard, but the skin on his cock was so smooth, like velvet. I shoved his shorts down, using my hand to rub his now bare erection along my slick passage. That got a reaction, and he sat up, pushing me off his lap. I sprawled out on the floor, a little stunned. It had knocked the wind out of me. Akira cursed, then apologized, but made no move to help me up. He looked like he was almost afraid of me. He sat watching me, his elbows on his knees now, shorts again covering his magnificent erection. I propped myself up on my elbows, my breasts jutting forward. I drew up my knees, parting them a little so that he could see my sex clearly. "I know what I want for my birthday now," I told him. I began to touch my sex as I spoke, looking down at the wet folds as I did so. "No," he said, obviously reading my intent. "We can't do that, Lana. It's completely inappropriate." I pouted at him. "You didn't even let me finish. Don't you want to hear what I was going to say?" He shook his head, his jaw clenched. Stubborn man. I looked down again at myself as I pushed a finger inside. "Do you think my pussy is pretty, Akira?" I asked, wanting to shock him and turn him on with the crude language. "I know men are supposed to love them, but I don't think mine's very cute. Do you think it is?" His face looked in danger of turning purple, but he couldn't seem to look away from what I was doing with my hand. I stood, shrugging out of my shirt. It hadn't been covering anything anyway. I was going to say, before you rudely interrupted me, that I wanted you to kiss me. Just a kiss. I want you to be my first. I approached him as I spoke, and he sat up straight to watch me. I walked until I bumped into his chest, my legs straddling one of his. My breasts were dangerously close to his face. I brushed them against him, once, twice. "Will you be my first kiss, Akira?" I whispered. He didn't answer. I straddled his legs, my knees digging into his soft couch. I tightened them on his hips as I leaned forward to kiss him. I grabbed his hair as I did so, and he didn't stop me, still frozen in place. I rubbed against him like a kitten, groaning, and he finally reacted, gripping my hair and kissing me back. He tasted divine, and his mean lips were so soft against mine. I felt such an aching emptiness at my core, and I wanted so badly for him to be inside of me, to fill that emptiness. I rubbed my sex against his hard length until we both moaned. The kiss went on, and I was more than ready for the next step when I finally pulled back. "Thank you," I told him, panting. "That was exactly how I dreamed my first kiss would be. Now I want you to make love to me." As I spoke, I brought his hands up to my aching breasts, and he kneaded at the pliant flesh, his eyes intense. I loved watching his dark hands against my skin, the contrast so beautiful to me. Abruptly his hands left me, and he pushed me back up to my feet with hard hands on my hips. "We can't do this, Lana. This is wrong," he told me, his voice harsh and labored. I propped my foot up beside his hip, giving him a hell of a view in my micro-miniskirt. I gripped one of his hands, slipping in between my legs to touch me. He didn't resist me, immediately beginning to touch me just how I craved, his fingers skillful in their soft exploration. "I'm 18 today, Akira. There's no reason why you can't take me now." He had a hard finger pushed inside of me, just the tip, as he spoke in a breathless voice. "There are a million reasons, the first of which is that you deserve better than me, Lana. You're made of too fine of stuff for the likes of me, and I respect your father. He's trusted me to spend countless hours with you over the years. I'm positive that he wouldn't approve of me doing this with you." As he spoke, I wiggled against his big finger, ignoring all of those reasons out of hand. They were ridiculous to me. I was an adult today, and I would do what I wanted. I pushed down on his finger, and he worked it deeper, groaning as he did so. "You're too tight, Lana. I would hurt you." He pulled his shorts down, exposing his engorged member. "Look at it, Lana. I'm too big to take a virgin, especially a tiny little thing like you." I thought his description of me was ludicrous. I was thin, but saw myself as tall and gawky, by no means tiny. But I did kind of like him thinking of me that way. Despite all of his protests, he was still working that wonderful finger into me, deeper and deeper, until he reached a barrier. He tested it, rather thoroughly, Before he seemed to understand what it was, he cursed fluently, but didn't remove that thick finger. "That's your fucking hymen," he said, his eyelids heavy. I leaned my breasts into his face, rubbing a hard nipple against those soft, mean lips. He took it into his mouth, sucking on it with a sexy groan. "Pleasure me, Akira. Please. I want you to make me come. You can do it with just your fingers in your mouth, right? Would that gross you out, to use your mouth on my pussy? Do you think it's ugly?" He made a hot little noise of protest, his finger moving inside of me, working in and out of me in tiny little strokes. "No, baby. Your pussy is so fucking pretty. I would love to get my mouth on you. It's the prettiest fucking thing I've ever seen." I wanted to giggle at the ridiculous thing I'd gotten him to say, but my breath caught in my throat. I still loved to tease him, even while we were doing this. I gripped his hair as he suckled at my breasts. "What about my breasts? Do you think my breasts are pretty?" He moaned. "Baby, every inch of you is impossibly gorgeous, and I know you know it, you little minx." "I don't know it unless you tell me, Akira. I've only ever cared what you think. I don't care about anybody else." "Well, you're beautiful, Lana. Painfully so." He stroked me with that finger, bringing his other hand to my sex and rubbing circles on just the perfect little spot. "So that's my clit," I thought as my gaze started to go fuzzy with the pleasure of it. His fingers were doing just the perfect things, and he brought me to the sweetest climax. I panted his name softly. He had me on my back on the couch, his face buried between my legs before I even knew his intent. I nearly screamed in shock at the pleasure of it. He licked and sucked and used those wonderful hands to bring me to another mind-blowing orgasm. After that, he worked on me slowly, kissing and licking and stroking all over my body, finally coming up to my mouth for a long kiss. I groaned as I tasted myself in his mouth. "I need you inside of me, Akira," I said, when he finally pulled back. He shook his head, his mouth tight, his eyes pained. "I'm a bastard for doing this much, Lana. I don't deserve to lay even a finger on your perfect skin." I reached down, gripping his impressive length and working him free of his shorts. Our eyes were locked as I spoke. "I'm 18, and I'm determined that I don't want to be a virgin anymore. I went on the pill 2 months ago. Would you rather it be you to take my virginity, or do you want me to give it to some jerk I meet at college? Maybe I'll give it up at a frat party. Would you prefer that? Or would you rather bury this beautiful cock inside of me tonight? I'll let you pick." He groaned, and I knew instantly which option he'd chosen. He held my thighs wide apart with his hands, lining himself up at my entrance, his eyes intense and hungry. "Last chance to change your mind, Lana," he said on a gasp. I reached down to stroke him, trying to tug him inside of me. He began to push in with a harsh groan. He worked himself in agonizingly slowly, inch by hard inch, feeding that magnificent length into me with his hand. He stopped when he'd reached that barrier. His breathing was ragged. "This is going to hurt. I'm sorry. It's unavoidable. I need to rip this barrier. It will only hurt like this the first time, okay?" I just nodded, wanting him deeper inside of me, no matter the pain. He propped himself on both elbows above me, tensing his entire body in preparation. He thrust in hard, sinking to the hilt with the force. He shuddered as he paused inside of me, waiting for me to get used to the fullness. It had hurt a lot, but it still felt good, too. I was so achy and needy for him, and had wanted this for so long, that the pain seemed like a little thing when compared to the joy I felt at finally having him inside of me. He brought a hand between us, circling my clit with his thumb. I began to writhe. "You're so fucking tight that I'm going to embarrass myself, baby. I want you with me when I come," he whispered. His sexy words, combined with all of the wonderful things he was doing to me, made me pant with my building orgasm. He began to thrust, big, heavy thrusts that went on and on, his fingers still working on me. He kept going until I began to clench around him with another glorious orgasm. "Yes," he grunted as he began to shudder and come himself. "Oh, yes, Lana." After we'd recovered, he carried me up to his bed, tending to me and holding me. We spent the night together, and it was the best night of my life. He made love to me over and over again, worshipping my body with his. The spell wasn't broken until morning, when he was thrusting inside of me yet again. He had used me so thoroughly that I was deliciously sore, each movement reminding me of how much he'd enjoyed my body. He brought me to climax first, before he let himself go. "I love you, Akira," I said to him as he lay on top of me when we'd finished. My voice was quiet, but sure. "I always have, and I always will. I want to be with you forever. I don't want anyone else." He stiffened at my words, immediately taking his weight off me and sitting up on the side of the bed, his back to me, his legs on the floor. "That's not possible, Lana," he said, his tone very final. My heart stopped in my chest, my mind racing. "You said you and Milena had broken up," I said, my voice sounding accusatory. He turned to look at me, his features anguished and severe. "We are. This has nothing to do with Milena. This has to do with you. You have the world at your feet, and you're still so young. You can't possibly know what you want at your age. You need to go to college. You need to go experience life and see the world. You're unbearably beautiful and smart, and your family's wealth means that the sky is the limit for you. You have an amazing life ahead of you, and I would never dream of being the thing that stood in your way. This can't be anything more than what it was, Lana. It was an incredible night. You were incredible. But I won't tie you to this rock. I'm not that selfish." His tone was kind, even tender, but all I heard was a rejection. In just a few short minutes, he had stomped all of my dreams of a happy life into dust. I was a little numb that morning as I showered, dressed, and left his house. He hovered over me, studying me with worried eyes as I prepared to leave. "Are you okay, Lana?" he asked, his voice concerned. But he didn't touch me, not once. He didn't correct his clear rejection, or take it back, and he never even came close to saying that he loved me too. I left his house with a broken heart. I galvanized myself into professing myself to him one more time, going to his bar that afternoon. I would hate myself if I didn't give it my best shot. I couldn't just give up on the thing that I'd always wanted. I never even got a chance to speak to him again. I was told by the bartender that he was in his office. I went to the employees-only section of the bar without asking. No one paid me any mind. They were all used to me doing as I pleased, since I had dogged Akira's every step for years now, going wherever I wanted whenever I pleased. I nearly barged into his office before I heard the voices nearly shouting inside. The door was open just a crack, and I peeked inside. Milena was pressed against Akira, his hand in her hair. They were embracing, though they were talking, not kissing, as it at first appeared. It was still a clear embrace, though. "Don't lie to me. I saw that little piece of jailbait leaving your house this morning. I'll kill her," Milena was saying to him, her voice low and mean. "Leave her alone, Milena. It isn't what it looked like. Lana is just a family friend with an inconvenient infatuation. Just leave her alone, 'kay?" His voice was earnest and pleading. I backed away from the doorway, my hand flying to my chest. He's still involved with Milena, I realized in horror. I had shamelessly seduced him, not taking no for an answer, but he hadn't wanted me. He was clearly concerned that he might lose the one that he really cared about, going by the earnest note in his voice. If he did lose her, it would be my fault. He must hate me, I realized, so disgusted with myself that I wanted to be sick. I was just a family friend with an inconvenient infatuation, he'd said. I walked away on leaden feet, feeling sick down to my soul. I flew off the island that night. I didn't return for 8 long, desolate years. Chapter 11. The staff at the hospital recognized us both on sight. My family was well known on the island, and Akira was, well, Akira. He was a local legend. We got the local treatment, a nurse taking me back immediately and cleaning off my cuts in short order, Akira hovering at my back the entire time. "She got you good," the nurse said as she checked over the cuts very carefully. She was a local, short, heavy-set woman, with a friendly face and a long black braid running down her back. "But it'll heal up in a few days. You don't need stitches or nothing." She grinned suddenly. "Word is you won. Good job. Malena beat up my cousin a few months ago, and for no good reason. I hate that crazy bitch." Word traveled fast on the island, apparently. I couldn't help it. I grinned back proudly. I tried not to resort to fighting like a girl, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Akira tugged on a lock of my hair. It was a reprimand, I knew. The woman threw back her head and laughed. "That's a good one." We were in and out of the hospital within a half an hour, thanks to the local treatment. "Just be sure to avoid any sitting water, and the ocean, of course, until those cuts close up good," the nurse instructed. That killed my good mood. I had wanted so badly to go surfing again in the morning. I was sullen as Akira pulled me by the hand out of the hospital and to his car. "Can we go to your house?" I asked him as he pulled out of the parking lot. I was a little worried that he would drop me off at the resort. He didn't look at me as he grimaced. "Tutu and Mari will torture me for at least a month if we don't swing back by the shops, and show them that your arm got patched up fine." "And then can we go to your house?" I asked. He sent me a searching look. "Yeah," he said. I felt a wave of relief. I had been worried that, after the drama-filled night, he wouldn't want to spend any more time with me. I considered what to do the next day, since we couldn't go in the ocean. I sighed heavily. I guess I need to work all day tomorrow, since I can't surf, and I'm already hopelessly behind on my schedule. I'll need to start really early, I suppose. He glanced at me, his eyes almost sad. "Please don't. Spend the day with me," he said. It was a simple request, uttered in his gentlest tone, and nothing on earth could have made me refuse him. "I never could say no to you," I told him, revealing my vulnerability. It wasn't as though I'd ever been able to hide it. He gave me a wicked grin at that. "I'll be taking advantage of that. You might regret telling me that." I sighed, my chest hurting a little. "Never. I'd be happy if you wanted anything from me, anything at all. It's always been that way, Akira. You must know that there's nothing I wouldn't do just to make you smile." "Oh, Lana," Akira said, stroking a hand over my hair, his eyes sorrowful. I wondered if he looked so sad because my heart was in my eyes, and in my voice, and he felt bad that he could never return those kinds of feelings, not for me. We were silent for the last few minutes of the drive, both of us lost in our own thoughts. He opened my door, holding out a hand to help me out. He had me pinned to the side of the car in a flash, his mouth on mine in a hard, passionate kiss. He didn't pull back for long minutes. I pressed up against him, snaking my arms around his back to squeeze his butt. He jumped a little, but didn't stop me, so I took full advantage, gripping him to me, and caressing that perfect butt at my leisure. When he finally ended the kiss, I protested. He just kissed the top of my head, pulling me towards the bar. "I've been dying to kiss you all afternoon," he told me. I was both floored and thrilled by his words. Only the bar remained open. Samari and Tutu had taken up residence there, since their own establishments were closed for the night. Mari started humming the theme to Rocky loudly when we walked in the door. Tutu joined in, showing the room her impressive shadow-boxing techniques and accompaniment. Their little show of support had me laughing until tears ran down my face. They had the entire room joining in, even eliciting a rare, loud, carefree laugh from Akira. Tutu and Mari were in such rare form that we ended up sitting at the bar and talking with them for 4 hours, catching up and joking and just talking like we used to. It was like old times, and I had missed old times. Akira sat in a bar stool beside his female relatives, but when I went to take the seat beside him, he just pulled me tight against him. I stayed in his arms for the joy-filled evening, soaking him in as I leaned against him, his arms tight around me. When it became clear that we weren't going anywhere any time soon, he stood, tugging me into the chair, but resuming a similar hold on me from behind, but with him standing. He was affectionate and cuddly, stroking my hair, and bending down to kiss the top of my head often. His actions seemed to make Tutu and Mari giddy with excitement. They kept elbowing each other, huge smiles on their faces every time he kissed my head. He didn't seem to care what they had assumed by the way he was acting, so I didn't let it trouble me either. If he wanted to touch me, I wanted to be touched. Tutu was well into her cups when she began to get truly outrageous. She pointed an accusatory finger at me. "Are you on the pill?" she asked, her tone low and mean. I nodded, laughing as she clutched at her heart, shuddering. "That will make you barren. It's a fact. Get off those pills immediately. It might already be too late. Let me see your purse." Someone from the resort had delivered my red handbag, and I'd stashed it under the stool, but I shook my head. The bag was at my feet, and she dove for it, bouncing back spryly when she had a good grip on it. I just laughed, wondering what she was doing. She dug through it, fishing out my packet of birth control pills almost immediately. My eyes widened. What was she up to now? I need those, Tutu. What on earth are you doing?" She shook her head stubbornly, pursed her lips, and took off for the bathroom, running like she was 16 instead of 60. I turned in Akira's arms, giving him a baffled look. "Akira, that was my birth control. This is bad." He just shrugged, looking way too unconcerned about the whole thing. I got up with a sigh, intending to follow crazy Tutu. Mari sent me a strange look, as though she thought I was crazy, and Akira pushed me back into the stool, wrapping those massive arms around me tightly. "You don't want to be alone with Tutu in a small space when she's in a mood like this, Lana. Trust me, the pills can be replaced." I sighed, supposing he was right. Tutu returned shortly, rubbing her hands together and cackling as she stepped out of the bathroom, the pills obviously absent. Has she gotten even crazier? I asked her children, my tone idle. They both just made noises of non-committal. "You can thank me later, since I'm feeling generous," was the first thing she said as she rejoined us. I snorted loudly. She rubbed her hands together. "Mari and I will plan the wedding. It will be outside, and the weather will be perfect." Her tone implied that she had some control over that. I turned and gave Akira a pointed look. "You want to set her straight? Don't you think this is a bit much?" I asked him quietly. He just shrugged, smirking. "Why bother? Let her have her fun." I thought it might be time to leave, since the place had officially turned into Crazy Town. I told Mari as much. She just gave me an arch look. "And how crazy are you, pretty girl, that you didn't know it's been Crazy Town all along?" That made me laugh, and lighten the mood, the conversation, too. I was shocked when I checked the time and saw that it was nearly 2 a.m. How late do you guys normally stay up? It is way past my bedtime. "Don't you know it's Friday night?" Tutu asked. "I won't leave until they kick me out." Mari gave me a level stare. She's not joking. "Say good night to Lana. I'm taking her home," Akira said, hearing my comments. Both women protested, but hugged me goodbye. "I'll set up a spa day for the day after tomorrow. Does that sound good?" I asked them. They both nodded enthusiastically. I heard Tutu's last comment as we were walking out the door. "He's going to keep her in bed all day tomorrow." She had projected her voice loudly, as though telling the entire bar. I was still laughing as Akira pulled me to his car. Chapter 12. He was serious on the drive to his house. "You need to be careful of Milena. It's hard to know what she's capable of. You got the better of her that time, but she is usually a better fighter than that. I've seen it. I think she was just so mad that she forgot how to fight. If you see her out in public, you need to walk away. I don't want you getting hurt. She'll have twice as much to prove now." I shrugged. "I'll be gone soon enough. I doubt I'll run into her." He gave me a hooded glance out of the corner of his eye, his gaze returning quickly to the road. "Are you so anxious to leave us again?" he asked, his voice very quiet. I didn't answer, stewing for a while. I decided I didn't owe him an answer, not for a question like that. His hand went to the back of my head, gripping my hair tightly. I sent him a surprised glance, but his face was closed off, his eyes on the road as he pulled left onto the private drive that led to his house. He started kissing me as soon as he opened my door, pushing me against the side of his car. He yanked at my skirt, lifting me against him. I wrapped my legs around his waist, and he groaned. It was a sound of approval from deep in his throat. He used the weight of his hips to push me high against the car, and used both hands to pull the top of my dress down. He dragged his heavy arousal against me all the while, making me moan. We were in his driveway, in full view of his neighbors, if they cared to look, but I couldn't bring myself to care, not even a little. Even if it had been broad daylight out instead of 2:30 in the morning, I doubted I would have turned him down. I had always been his for the taking, any time, anywhere. "You said you could never tell me no," he said roughly, unclasping the front closure of my bra. My only response was a moan as he kneaded at the heavy globes. He shrugged out of his own dress shirt, ripping more buttons than he ended up unbuttoning in his hurry. He shifted me away from the car, melding our bare chests together. "Did you mean it, when you said that?" I felt his hand working below me, and then his bared erection was pressing against me. He shifted aside the tiny scrap of lace that served as his only barrier, poising himself at my entrance in a flash. He worked into me with his hands on my hips, my passage already slick enough to ease his progress. He buried himself to the hilt, but didn't begin to thrust right away, instead holding himself there, so impossibly deep inside of me. He used both of his arms to hug me securely against him as he began to walk, moving to his front door now that he'd buried himself inside of me. I was lost, each step sending excruciating waves of pleasure straight to my core. My thighs were wrapped tightly around his hips. When he used one hand to unlock his front door, I rubbed against him, dragging my nipples against his chest, my sex clenching him as I wiggled against him. He moaned, ramming into me hard with the same motion he used to shut the front door behind us. He pulled out of me with excruciating slowness, ramming back in much harder and faster, then pulling out slowly again, dragging his thick cock against all of the right spots. "Faster, Akira. I want you to fuck me hard and fast," I told him on a ragged breath. I wanted to drive him crazy. It worked. He grabbed my hips and rocked into me. He pounded me against the closed door like his life depended on it, my nails raking his back as I screamed his name. It was almost painful with his huge girth, but I still loved it. "This is paradise. You took my paradise with you when you left, Lana," he rasped into my ear. The words drove me over the edge, and I shouted his name as I came. He followed, burying his face into my neck as he shuddered against me. He surprised me by biting my neck as the shudders eased. I yelped in surprise. "I'm going to wring so many orgasms out of you that you'll be too exhausted to even think about leaving this rock," he growled into my ear. I laughed, feeling almost drunk from the aftershocks of the powerful orgasm. "You're welcome to try," I murmured back. He pulled out of me slowly, making us both groan in the process. He shifted me around until I was cradled against his chest. His look was a warning. "Baby, I won't be trying. I'll be doing." I made a contented little noise, burrowing my face into his chest. He stroked my hair, the tender gesture belying the mean look on his face. He laid me on his bed, pulling my clothes off with swift, economical motions. I just lay where he left me, feeling a little boneless as he disappeared into his bathroom. I heard a bath running, and a moment later he was back striding towards me, completely nude. I drank in the sight of his perfect body as he moved. I sighed a little dreamily. "You're magnificent," I told him. It was a fact. He smirked at me, bending to pick me up. "Look who's talking," he said with a grunt, flipping me onto his shoulder. He squeezed my butt as he carried me into the bathroom. He was much gentler as he lowered me into the scorching hot water. He turned back to grab something on the counter, and I got a full, unencumbered view of his perky butt. I made an appreciative little at the sight. He threw a grin over his shoulder. You always were obsessed with my butt. I couldn't go out in public without being stalked when you were in high school. You did love to talk about my ass. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is for a grown man to get his ass ogled by high school girls every time he goes out in public?" I laughed until tears streamed down my cheeks, because it wasn't an exaggeration, and I had simply adored tormenting him with my little schemes back then. The old memories warmed me. I had made a point to tell just about anyone who would listen just how unparalleled his ass was, and my high school friends had been paying attention. All of our eyes had followed Akira whenever we had been lucky enough to catch a glimpse of him coming or going. He joined me in the steaming water, and we washed each other with lingering touches. I straddled him so I could wash his thick hair. He kissed me, and I could feel him growing hard against me. I shifted, trying to work him inside of me, but he pulled back. "I want you in bed," he told me, rising. We dried off, and he tugged me to the bed, pushing me onto my back and moving over me. He brought our faces close together. He watched me, his expression almost wary. We stared at each other for a long time before he cupped my face in his big hands. "Don't leave us again, Lana," he whispered roughly. "Don't leave me. Stay, please." I shook my head, not understanding, not even letting myself hope that he meant what I longed for him to. "Why, Akira?" "Because I was wrong. I thought I was doing the right thing when I told you to leave the first time, but I was so wrong. I thought you'd see the world, and that your infatuation with me would evaporate. I thought you were too young and inexperienced to see that. But you were right. I was the one that was blind. I loved you then. I adored the ground you walked on, and nothing has changed. I knew I wouldn't stop loving you, but I was wrong to doubt you, wrong to think that your feelings would change. I've been consoling myself for so long with the idea that even if I was miserable without you, at least you were happy out there somewhere. And now that I know that's not the case, I can't bear the thought of you leaving me again." My heart twisted painfully in my chest. It was hard to imagine that something I had wanted for so long would just suddenly appear before me. It felt surreal, and I just stared at him dumbly for a few long moments. "What about the things you said to Milena back then? About me being a family friend with an inconvenient infatuation? Why would you say that if it wasn't true?" "It's the only way I could think of to manage her. We were broken up, and she was threatening to hurt you. I knew her threats were idle. I've seen her do some pretty awful things, and I couldn't think of another way to stop her from hurting you. I thought you'd forgotten me," he continued, "until some of your friends stopped by to see me. James and Bianca painted a different picture for me, and when I realized that you hadn't forgotten about me, I contacted your father. He didn't know that I intended to get you to stay when I talked him into getting you to come to Maui. In fact, I feel like a bastard for manipulating him, knowing that he probably won't be pleased to know that you and I are—" I shook my head. Akira had never understood how highly my father regarded him. He was like another son to my father, but Akira had always been too blind to see it. "I love you, Lana, and I want you to stay. You said you could never say no to me, and I intend to hold you to that. Marry me." He hadn't made it a question, as though he just couldn't quite do it, and that made me smile even through my tears. He wiped the tears away as I nodded tremulously. "Yes," I said, my heart filling with joy. I hadn't been lying. I was literally incapable of telling him no. He smiled, moving against me, and the relief in his face let me know just how much he'd feared my refusal. "I love you," I said breathlessly, as he pushed himself inside of me. "Good," he murmured roughly, "because I'm keeping you forever." "I'm planning our wedding, not Tutu and Mari," I told him sometime later. He was folded against my back, his hand stroking my hip idly, while we caught up. He kissed the side of my head. "It's cute that you think that. Let me know how it works out for you." I laughed. "You don't think I can go toe-to-toe with your mother and win?" "I don't think anyone can. We'll just see about that." Chapter 13. In the end, It was a compromise. Tutu wanted to plan the wedding in 2 weeks. I wanted 2 months. We settled on 1. I wanted a smaller ceremony, with family and our closest friends. Tutu thought it was completely rude not to invite the entire island. She was closer to winning that one than I was, though I insisted on a ceremony on the beach at my family's villa, and I got my way there. I made my dear friend Bianca fly in a week before the wedding. Since she'd retired from being a flight attendant to be a painter full-time, we'd taken to calling each other nearly every day. I'd been helping her plan her own wedding, and I thought that it was only fair that she'd become equally involved in my own special day. James, her ridiculously possessive fiancé, couldn't join her for several days, and I picked her up myself from the airport for some one-on-one girl time. Well, as one-on-one as we could get, since she had a full-time bodyguard that tried to follow her everywhere. Considering that she'd been shot just a few months ago, I couldn't completely blame her crazy future husband for going to such lengths. 2 men had died in the attack, and she, her bestie, and her bodyguard had all been shot. I had heard about the whole thing after the fact, when she was in the hospital. I thought of how worried I'd been when I heard about the tragic incident. They'd known she would live by the time I learned of the attack, but I'd rushed to her side, completely distraught. I couldn't even imagine how James must have felt. We hugged. She tried to pull away first, but I held on tight. "Thank you so much for coming," I said into her good ear. "I know it must have been a fight. Is James still having a hard time letting you out of his sight?" She laughed, and I pulled back to look at her. Her hair nearly covered the quarter-sized pink scar back near her jaw. It still made me want to cry every time I saw it. Not because it looked that bad, but because I'd heard the story of how it had happened, and the thought that we had come so close to losing her was still a tender wound for me. The scar got to me, but Bianca seemed completely over it. She didn't try to hide it, or show it off. It was as though she'd already forgotten about it. Even the hearing aid that she'd had to adopt didn't seem to affect her, and I'd only heard her complain one time about the fact that she hadn't been able to eat solid food for over a month after the attack. I'd made a comment once about the fact that a traumatizing incident that would have defeated most people seemed to have barely affected her. "We were so lucky that it's hard to sweat the small stuff anymore." She'd responded with her little shrug. She was just like that, weathering storms in that quiet way of hers. She fascinated and impressed me in so many ways, because she was both one of the most soft-spoken and one of the strongest women that I'd ever met. "Jackie tried to come with me," she told me, as we walked to my car. I had to put my foot down. I wanted some time with just the 2 of us, but I guarantee she'll be here within 2 days. I smiled. I could tell by her tone that Jackie was growing on her. "And how many days do you think James and Stefan will stay away?" She pursed her lips, taking the question more seriously than I'd intended. "I predict they'll come together, and if they don't show up by tomorrow, I'll be surprised. I actually think that Stefan will be the one to egg James on, because James is afraid he's been too smothering since the attack, and Stefan would never think of it that way. The only girl's time we're guaranteed is today, most likely. So what should we do before my boys crash the party?" I laughed at her matter-of-fact tone. She didn't sound a bit put out about it either, which was good, because I couldn't imagine James becoming less possessive of her time in the near or distant future. "Well, we need to stop by for a last dress fitting. It shouldn't take too long. So how about an afternoon at the spa?" "Sounds like a plan," she said easily. We met Mari at the bridal shop. She was my maid of honor, and Bianca was a bridesmaid, but it was the first time the 2 of them had met. I was relieved but unsurprised when they got along right off the bat. Neither were the type to cause drama. I tried on my short silk wedding dress, pleased with the fit. It was a simple design, and perfect for the beach. I couldn't have been happier with how it had turned out. It hugged my curves in a flattering way, showing my legs off to advantage. Mari and Bianca tried on their light blue silk dresses. They were designed very similarly to my wedding dress, and both of the stunning women were suited to the look, if in very different ways. "Have the other bridesmaids pay me a visit as soon as they get into town," the dressmaker told me as we left. The fitting hadn't taken more than a half an hour. "The sooner the better." I nodded that I would. Sophia and Jackie weren't due in town for 3 more days, but I would pass the message along. We spent a long, lazy afternoon at the spa, Mari joining us as we caught up on every little thing. Tutu showed up within an hour of our arrival, and Bianca and I good-naturedly gave up on a day of one-on-one time. There was plenty of time for that later, when we weren't in the midst of wedding madness. I could tell right away that Tutu liked Bianca, but that she liked messing with her, too. "You aren't another tall blonde woman that's here to steal our local men, are you?" Tutu asked Bianca with a glare, as we had our toes done. "Around here we smack the nerve right out of white girls for doing that." Bianca wasn't intimidated, as Tutu had been expecting. Instead, she threw her head back and laughed. She pointed at Tutu, still smiling. "I've heard all about you, Tutu. Lana warned me that you might call me a howlie and give me a hard time. I'm ready for you. But you don't have to worry about me stealing any men. I'm engaged, and he's not a local, though when you get a look at him you'll still probably want to smack me." Tutu grinned back at her. "You're another sassy blonde girl. I like that." I was relieved. When Tutu decided to dislike somebody, things got a little too interesting. I could only hope that she wouldn't take exception to any of my other bridesmaids. Bianca was staying with me at my family estate, since it was the location of the wedding, and there was plenty of room for all of the mainland bridesmaids and groomsmen. Akira and I hadn't even considered the idea of sleeping separately until the wedding, so he was staying there with me as well. He met us the second we all came, laughing, through the front door of the villa. He was smiling. I quickly saw why as 2 men appeared behind him. Stefan didn't hesitate, striding forward with a smile to embrace a startled Bianca, and then me. He politely introduced himself to Mari and Tutu, while I glanced at James, who was still hanging back, studying Bianca with a wary look. I glanced at her. She looked a little surprised, but not unhappy, that she'd been followed. As though he couldn't help himself, James moved to her, crushing her against him as he said something into her ear that had her blushing profusely as he pulled back. "And how are you, Lana?" James asked, looking towards me with a grin. I grinned back, knowing the part he'd played in my own personal bliss. "As well as you could expect, considering that I have the best friends in the world." Jackie and Camden, and Parker and Sophia, all showed up 2 days later, my parents a day after that. Watching my father with Akira did something very good for my soul, especially with everything on the table as it now was. My father greeted Akira before he even gave me, his favorite little girl, so much as a glance. I didn't feel slighted, and I wasn't the least bit worried about his approval. He, like me, had only ever seen the good in Akira. The 2 men embraced, and I saw that my father said something into Akira's ear that had the huge man looking suspiciously water-eyed. I hadn't heard my father's words, but I did hear Akira's clear, quiet response. "Thank you, sir. That means the world to me." My dad was in his 50s, but still a very handsome man. Camden and I both took after our mother in looks, but I thought that we'd both have been fine taking after him, too. Our dad was tall and elegantly built, with silver hair and warm brown eyes that at that moment somehow reminded me of Akira. He had the warmest, most enchanting smile, and it enchanted me more than ever when he turned it on Akira. "Call me Dad," I heard him say quietly to Akira, and I just about lost it. I had to fight not to burst into sappy tears at the dumbfounded, grateful look on Akira's face. I asked Akira later what my father had said into his ear. He clenched his jaw, and I could see that he had to struggle not to get choked up at just the memory. He told me, "About damn time, son." I didn't expect him to approve. "I know," I told him, giving him a tight hug. "Which is silly. He thinks the world of you, you know. He always has." "I don't feel worthy of either of you." I squeezed him tighter. "Well, you're just going to have to get over that. We're all family now. All we can hope is that Tutu doesn't try to box my dad's ears at the wedding." I wasn't really worried about that possibility, but if I was just a touch worried, I needn't have been. When Tutu and my father finally met again, face to face, they embraced for so long, whispering into each other's ears, that my ravishingly beautiful mother had begun to shoot them some rather disgruntled looks. That was ridiculous, of course, because when they pulled back I saw the tears in Tutu's eyes. After all these years, she had finally thanked him for all that he had done to mentor her son. I could tell by the look on my dad's face that it had been worth the wait. As Tutu had predicted, the day of the wedding dawned sunny and picture-perfect, and she took full credit for it. Tutu wore light blue to match the bridesmaids for pictures, and she fussed over me as I dressed for the beach ceremony. I couldn't help taunting her a little as she worked on straightening the lei around my neck, her lips pursed. "I told you so, Tutu," I told her quietly, with a smug little grin. It felt smug, but a happy kind of smug. Her eyes shot up to me, one sassy brow shooting straight for the sky. "What do you mean by that?" "I told you years ago that I would marry Akira, and you told me it would never happen." She snorted. "Silly girl. This was all my idea. The whole time. I was using reverse psychology on you, and you fell for it. You're welcome." I laughed so hard that I had to have my eye makeup redone. We had a short ceremony on the beach at sunset, with less than 100 guests in attendance. We watched each other as we said our vows. Akira's face was stoic, but I could see the strong emotion in his eyes, and I was certain that he could read the adoration in mine. I'd spent a little time regretting all of the years we could have been together, if I had just been brave enough to come back sooner, or if he had just been bold enough to contact me. But I felt at peace even with that, as I looked with clarity at the good years ahead of us. I knew that we would never take each other for granted, or fail to appreciate what we had. Our time apart had been painful, but it had forever assured us of that. Akira gave me the biggest grin as we were announced man and wife. He looked breathtaking, his hair pulled back to show off his starkly handsome face, dressed in white, with a maili lei draped over his strong shoulders. We had only invited about 100 close friends and family to the beach ceremony, but the reception/wild party was a whole different story. There was only a short list of people on the island that weren't invited. The family estate was opened up and equipped for a hell of a party. In a completely uncharacteristic move for me, I made no attempts to be a good hostess. I didn't greet all the guests, and I didn't make the rounds to mingle or to share my time. I left that to whoever. I knew my mother, father, my devilish brother Camden, or hell, even Jackie could take over those duties. This was supposed to be my day, and so I took that literally, doing the only thing I wanted to do. Akira and I danced, for hours and hours. We completely monopolized each other, stopping occasionally to chat and catch up with friends and family. But my goal was to spend as much of that magical night in Akira's arms, and I thought I succeeded admirably. We weren't the only love-struck couple I caught mooning over each other that night. James and Bianca did much the same, dancing and sharing positively indecent looks for most of the night. The party lasted into the next day, and we were dancing barefoot on the beach, out of sight from our guests, as streaks of dawn light began to color the sky. Music from the party drifted to us. We were far enough away that we only caught bits and pieces of it, barely enough to keep rhythm. Akira sprawled out on the sand at my feet suddenly, smiling up at me, as happy and carefree as I'd ever seen him. "Have you heard of the Hawaiian custom of wedding night beach sex?" I gave him a rueful smile. I was long past the days of falling for all of the local custom shenanigans. Generally, any sentence that began with, "Have you heard of the Hawaiian custom?" ended with a prank. "No, I haven't. And it's past the wedding night. I'd say it's officially morning now." "That's what I meant. Wedding morning beach sex. It's a well-known fact that in these parts that if you have wedding morning beach sex, you'll both live to be 100, at least. Technically, yesterday was our wedding morning. Today is the next morning." I broke off, giggling, as he tickled me until I fell on top of him. "I think you're missing my point," he told me with a grin, still tickling me mercilessly. "What's your point?" I gasped, trying in vain to tickle him back. "We need to make love on this beach right now if we want to grow really, really old together." He let up tickling my waist, burying his hands in my hair to kiss me. I was straddling him by the end of that long kiss. I pulled back to smile into his eyes. "Well, as long as it's really, really old," I murmured, resealing my lips over his. This has been Lana, a novella, written by R.K. Lilley, narrated by Nicole Phillips. Copyright 2013 by R.K. Lilley, LLC. Production copyright 2014 by R.K. Lilley, LLC.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.